They say death is the end, but what if it's where the real story begins? In the dusty heart of Western Australia, a respected doctor collapsed on the roadside and stayed clinically dead for 85 minutes. No heartbeat, no brain activity, 13 shocks, 48 minutes of CPR, then flatline, no response. They called it. They prepared to say goodbye. But just as the final prayer was whispered, the impossible happened. Not in a temple, not in a church, but in a rural clinic with no backup, no specialists, and a cold, lifeless body on the table. Today, you're going to hear that story.
I told her, check my pulse. She did. It seemed normal, but I wasn't convinced. Years of practice told me this wasn't heartburn. I needed help. So I called Liza, my wife, my partner in medicine and in life.
I was studying at a friend's house when the phone rang. Victor never called during clinics unless it was serious. He said, "Liza, I'm not feeling well. It's not pain, just tightness. Maybe nausea." I asked him, "Can you drive yourself to the hospital?" He said yes. I told him to head straight there. "I'll let Dr. Ramon know," I said. And that was the plan. It sounded manageable.
But something in my spirit nudged me. A voice, quiet but firm. Turn in here. I passed the sign, Campbell the Medical Center, a small mining town. Not even a hospital, just a clinic. I hesitated. Then I obeyed. Inside, the receptionist and a nurse looked up. I told them who I was. Dr. Victor Ignacio, consultant physician. They agreed to run an ECG. There was no doctor on site. He was at lunch. I'd have to read my own scan. They handed it to me. I looked at the paper and my heart dropped. ST segment elevation, leads 2, 3, and AVF. Inferior wall myocardial infarction. I was having a heart attack, and I knew it. I knew exactly what was happening to me, and I couldn't stop it.
He turned gray. The kind of gray that makes you afraid. He said, "Call the doctor, now." I paged him. While waiting, Victor started groaning. The pain was getting worse.
The on-call GP finally arrived. I told him what I saw on the ECG. He tried to reassure me, said, "You're only 39. It's probably indigestion." But I knew. This was the end of the road. They brought me to the resus room, hooked me up to the monitor. Morphine, no relief. The pain kept climbing. I looked at the screen, my pulse rising, blood pressure soaring. Then, darkness. That's the last thing I remember. And the first thing I lost. The last thing I remember was watching the monitor, my pulse rising, blood pressure spiking, and then black. No falling, no tunnel, just nothing.
He stopped responding. 1 second he was gripping the sheets. Next, his head dropped to the side. The nurse shouted, "We're losing him!" I felt frozen. This was not supposed to happen. Not to him, not to someone like Dr. Ignacio.
When I arrived at Cambalda, Victor had already coded. They were doing chest compressions. His face was pale, sunken. No movement. No breath. His eyes still open, but empty.
We started CPR immediately. Defibrillator ready. The machine analyzed. Shockable rhythm. V-fib. We delivered the first shock. His body jerked. Nothing. Second shock. Still nothing. Third. Fourth.
I called again. No one picked up. I called Clarice's number. She answered. Her voice was trembling. I said, "Let me speak to Victor." She hesitated, then whispered, "Ma'am, he's not responding." My heart dropped. I asked, "Is he alive?" She said, "We're trying. That's all. We're trying."
I received the call from Liza. I remember just saying, "What?" over and over. I couldn't process it. I was just with him 2 days ago. We were planning the next training rotation. How could this be happening?
We shocked him again. 5th, 6th, 7th. I've been doing this for decades, and I've never seen someone not respond after this long. Every 2 minutes we checked. Still V-fib. The clock was running. 20 minutes passed. 30.
His body was getting cold. I could feel it through the gloves. I didn't say it out loud, but in my mind I was already grieving.
I rushed to the hospital. I couldn't drive. I asked a friend. I kept whispering, please God, please don't take him. My fingers couldn't stop shaking.
We reached the 10th shock, then 11. Nothing. His rhythm deteriorated into a systole. Flatline. That's it. The screen went silent. No spikes, no flickers, just death.
I've seen flat lines before. I've held dying babies in my arms. But with Victor, it felt different. I stood there in silence. The room was heavy, like the air itself gave up.
We all knew. No heartbeat for over 45 minutes. Medically, his brain should be gone. His organs, dying. But protocol kept us going. One of the interns whispered, "His wife's on her way. Can we wait?" I didn't have the heart to say no, so we kept going.
I was 10. I was playing with my Legos when Mom called. She didn't say it directly, but I knew something was wrong. She was crying through her smile. That's the face she makes when everything is falling apart, but she's still hoping.
When we arrived, I couldn't feel my legs. They had to help me out of the car. I walked into the clinic and saw him. Pale. Still. The screen next to him wasn't beeping. I knew what that meant.
She walked in slowly, like she was underwater. Everything around her was quiet.
I took her hand. "I'm sorry," I said. "He's gone."
I held his hand. It was cold. So cold. I whispered, "Victor, I'm here." But he didn't move. I remembered my father's voice. "Pray," he said. "Even if you don't believe it will work, pray."
85 minutes. That's how long Victor Ignacio was clinically dead. 13 shocks. Over an hour of CPR. Every medical rule said it was over. But what happened next would defy everything medicine understood.
I knelt. I closed my eyes. And I said, "God, he's only 39. I'm 38. We have a son. I need a miracle."
Suddenly, we heard something. A gasp. A sound. Then, the monitor. A beep. One single beep. We all looked at each other. Then again, beep, beep.
I've never seen anything like it. His heart started on its own. Atrial fibrillation. Weak, but real. I yelled, "Continue compressions." We switched gears instantly.
I opened my eyes. At first I thought I imagined it. The room was shouting, moving. And I looked at the screen, and I saw it. A heartbeat.
I didn't know what was happening, but I remember her calling me and saying, "Baby, Daddy's heart is beating."
A heart that was silent for 85 minutes had just started again. Not because of a drug, not because of a shock, but because of a prayer.
When a heart starts beating after 85 minutes of silence, the first thing doctors feel isn't joy, it's disbelief. What do you do with a miracle when your training says it's impossible?
His heart was in atrial fibrillation. Chaotic. Irregular. Not a full rhythm, but something enough to work with. His chest was rising, slightly. Pink froth bubbled from the breathing tube. That meant fluid in his lungs, but also meant circulation was returning. We immediately changed gears. I ordered cold packs. "Start cooling the brain," I shouted. "We're not letting this one slip."
I was shaking. I couldn't tell if I was crying or just overwhelmed. I looked down at Dr. Ignacio, and I saw movement. Not much, just a flicker. That's when I realized he's fighting.
When I arrived at Kalgoorlie Hospital, the news had already spread. People weren't talking like it was over. They were whispering. He came back. I thought it was a bad joke, until I saw him. Still ventilated, still unconscious, but alive.
They wheeled him into the emergency department. I walked beside him. Machines everywhere. Tubes, cold packs. His skin was pale, but not the gray of death. Something was different. I asked, "What now?" And they said, "We transfer him to Perth." But then, the storm hit.
A freak hailstorm rolled in. Planes were grounded. The RFDS couldn't fly. So we had no choice. We had to stabilize him here, in a regional hospital not equipped for this level of care. We gave him a clot-busting drug, dangerous in his condition. It could cause internal bleeding. I told Liza, this might kill him. She looked me in the eyes and said, God brought him back. He will survive.
They call it thrombolysis, a drug to dissolve blood clots, usually given minutes after a heart attack. Victor was given it over an hour and a half later. It should have failed, but it didn't.
The next morning, I checked on his labs. His kidneys were shutting down. His liver enzymes were skyrocketing. His oxygen saturation was dangerously low. Every organ was failing, except his brain. That was the mystery. His pupils still reacted. I ran my tests again. Same result. Something didn't add up.
We prepared for the worst. Brain death. Vegetative state. Everyone was saying the same thing quietly. Even if he survives, he'll never be the same.
I sat next to him. I held his hand. His fingers didn't move, but I whispered anyway. "Victor, if you can hear me, come back to us. Please." Nurses passed behind me, giving that look. The one that says, "She's not ready to let go." But I didn't care. I wasn't talking to the doctors. I was talking to God.
His labs were terrifying. Total kidney shutdown, blood toxins rising. His body was swollen. His skin had that look. The waxy sheen of systemic failure. But somehow, he kept holding on. I asked my mom, "Can I talk to him?" She put the phone on speaker and held it near his ear. I just said, "Hi, Dad, it's me. I love you. I miss you." And I waited. Nothing happened. But she said she saw a tear.
That's when I knew something was different. Dead men don't cry. We kept him under full support. Ventilator, dialysis prep, adrenaline infusions. Every minute was a battle. I told my team, this man should not be alive. But he is.
2 days pass, then 3. Still no movement. No commands followed. And then, Sunday night came.
My aunt called from India. She said she'd been praying. And she said something strange. "Tonight, before you sleep, he will open his eyes." I wanted to believe her, but everything in front of me said no. Machines, charts, numbers, logic.
I was with him that evening. I spoke to him like I speak to children in coma. Simple things. "Victor, the weather today is warm. Your wife is here. You're safe." And then I saw it, a flicker, his eyelids, twice.
She called my name. "Liza, come here." I ran to the bedside. "Victor?" she said again. "If you can hear me, squeeze my hand." Nothing. Then she said, "Open your eyes." And he did. For just a second, he opened his eyes.
I gasped. I've never cried that fast. That deep. It was like light breaking through a storm. Everything we feared, brain death, vegetative state, gone in one blink.
The man with no pulse for 85 minutes, the body that should not live, had just opened his eyes. Eyes can lie, muscles can twitch, but speech, real speech, that's when the room goes silent. Because when someone who was dead for 85 minutes opens their mouth, you don't expect words. You expect confusion, a groan, a moan. But what Victor Ignacio said changed everything.
When he opened his eyes, I froze. My heart wanted to believe it, but my mind whispered, "It's just reflex." Then they started talking about reducing sedation, about testing his brain. I heard the word neurologist. I heard EEG, but I couldn't hear anything clearly. All I saw was his eyes, blinking, focusing.
That Monday morning, the team gathered. He was stable enough to begin weaning off the ventilator. His organs were still damaged, kidneys barely responding, but his brain, we had to know. Could he hear us? Did he know who he was?
I remember saying to the nurses, "Watch for any purposeful movement. He's off sedation now. If the brain's gone, we'll know. But if he's in there, he'll show us."
I stood outside his ICU door. I couldn't go in. I was too scared. What if he looked at me and didn't remember? What if he never spoke again? But then I heard someone yell, "He's moving."
His eyes opened wider. He looked around, slowly. Then he looked at me. That was the first moment I knew. He's back. Not just alive, but Victor. He blinked twice. I said, "Do you know me?" He nodded. Then the nurse asked him, "Do you want the tube removed?" And he nodded again.
They extubated him, carefully, slowly. One nurse held his head, another suctioned fluid. The room was quiet, every person watching his mouth, his throat, his breath.
I wasn't in the room when they removed the tube, but I got a call from a nurse. She said, "Doctor, you won't believe this." I asked, "What?" She said, "Do you know what he just asked for?" I said, "Tell me." She said, "He wants to see his blood gases." I laughed, then I cried.
He turned his head and whispered, "What do my arterial blood gases look like?" Those were his first words. I nearly collapsed. He wasn't confused. He wasn't mumbling. He wasn't a vegetable. He was Victor, a doctor, a scientist, a man who understood what had happened and still wanted the data.
I've seen hundreds of resuscitations. I've lost more patients than I can count. But this was different. You don't go from flatline to full cognition. Not in days, not even in weeks. But he did it in hours.
I checked his reflexes, normal. I tested memory, sharp. He even remembered the last ECG reading before collapsing. He quoted it like a textbook. I looked at Liza and said, "This isn't recovery. This is a return."
I finally walked in. I said, "Dear Ignacio, do you remember me?" He smiled faintly. "Clarice," he said. "Yeah," he said. "How's your confidence now?" That was his joke. That's when I lost it. I laughed through the tears. I had seen death. But now, I was looking at resurrection.
Mom let me talk to him again. This time, he replied. He said, "Hey, champ." I just held the phone and cried. He sounded like Dad, just like before.
In 3 days, he went from a dead man to a man making jokes, a man requesting lab results, a man comforting others. There's no protocol for that. No medical textbook has a chapter called What to Do When the Corpse Wants to Check His Charts.
I told him, "You're a miracle." He said, "No, I'm evidence." I asked, "Of what?" And he said, "That prayer is more powerful than time."
Nurses from every floor came down to see him. Doctors peeked in. People whispered in the halls. He's the one, right? The dead man who came back? But to me, he wasn't a legend. He was my husband, my Victor.
I signed his discharge summary on the 13th day, 13 days after declaring him dead. And I wrote something I've never written before in my entire career. Under outcome, I wrote, "Full recovery, medically unexplainable."
The voice after the silence was not weak. It was full, certain, unshaken. Victor Ignacio had returned, not as a shadow of who he was, but as a witness.
People keep asking me, "What did you see?" And for a while, I didn't know how to answer, not because I forgot, but because it felt too sacred to describe, too heavy for casual words. I've always been a man of science. I spent my life reading labs, scanning ECGs, trusting numbers. But there are no numbers in that place, no measurements, no formulas, just presence.
He was quieter than usual. Not weak, just thoughtful. I'd ask if he wanted the news, or visitors, or updates from the hospital, but he would just smile and say, "Not yet." It was like part of him was still somewhere else.
When I died, I didn't float above my body like people say. I didn't see a tunnel, no bright light at first, just awareness, no heartbeat, no the breath, but I was fully aware. I didn't feel pain, I didn't feel fear, I felt stillness, but not the kind that leads to sleep, the kind that makes everything else louder. Every regret, every word I didn't say, every moment I rushed through, it came at me like waves, and yet, in the middle of that, something warm surrounded me, like a voice, without words.
One night I asked him, "Do you remember anything?" He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "I didn't just survive, Liza. I was sent back." And I knew. This wasn't just recovery. This was assignment.
I was standing on the edge of something I can't explain. Behind me was everything I had done. My career, my choices, my pride, even my failures. Ahead of me was a light I couldn't look directly at, not blinding, but commanding. I felt like I was known completely, and still loved. And then, a voice, not external, it filled everything. It said, "It's not your time, just that," but it echoed through everything I was.
I remember telling Miguel. I said, "Dad's alive because of God." And he nodded. He was just 10, but somehow he understood it better than most adults.
I told Mom that God was putting the Lego pieces back together, because that's what I believed. I believed He could fix anything, even broken hearts.
Coming back was not instant joy. It hurt. Physically, yes, but also emotionally. I had touched something eternal, and now I was back in a hospital bed, surrounded by machines. People celebrated, but inside, I was trembling. Not because I was scared, but because I knew. This life, it's temporary, fragile, and most of us, we sleepwalk through it.
At night, he would whisper scripture, sometimes not even ones he memorized before. I would hear him say things like, "Teach us to number our days," or "Better is one day in your courts." It wasn't for show. It was just pouring out of him, like a river breaking through a dam.
My colleagues want to talk data. They want to analyze the defibrillator logs, the enzyme levels, the temperature preservation, and I understand that. I was one of them. I still am. But there's something beyond science, something not against it, just above it. I've seen both sides now. I've held the charts in one hand, and the silence of eternity in the other.
He's still the same man, still checks his labs, still annoys nurses with technical questions. But now, when he looks at someone, it's different. Slower. More eternal. He sees souls now, not just symptoms.
I wasn't just revived, I was recommissioned. Every day now feels like borrowed time, but not in a morbid way, in a purposeful way, like every moment must be spent wisely, because it's no longer mine, it's his.
What do you call a man who dies for 85 minutes and wakes up more alive than ever? Some call it a miracle. Some call it science pushed to its limit. But Victor Ignacio calls it mercy. In the world of medicine, proof is everything. A heartbeat recorded, a chemical level measured, a printout from a machine. But what if all the data says death and the patient still wakes up?
The day we reviewed Victor's full case file, I cleared my schedule. I wanted no interruptions. I wanted to understand how a man with 13 shocks and 85 minutes of clinical death walked out of ICU without brain damage. It didn't make sense, not on paper, not in practice, but I had to try.
I opened his kidney profile first. Totals shut down, creatinine levels off the chart, the kind of data we associate with multi-organ failure. Then I pulled up his liver enzymes. AST, ALT, GGT, catastrophic. No liver should have come back from that. And yet, they did.
I helped prepare the timeline for review. First shock at 13:44, last at 14:32, CPR in between. That's 48 minutes of attempts, followed by flatline. Then nothing. No spontaneous rhythm. Until 15:09, that's 37 minutes of asystole. We documented everything. The defibrillator log was digital. No way to fake that.
When Eduardo sent me the file, I skimmed it at first. Then I stopped. I went back. I read it line by line. No return of spontaneous circulation. No shockable rhythm. Announced dead at 15:06. But then, heartbeat detected at 15:10. I remember whispering, "This shouldn't be real." But it was.
I sat with them during the review, not to prove anything, just to witness. They weren't trying to exaggerate. They were trying to understand, trying to find a gap in the logic, a missed step. But there was none.
What scared me most was how clear it all was. No glitches, no misread vitals, no human error. We did everything right. And still, the body had no response. Then it just returned. Not gradually, not with help, but suddenly, like a switch flipped.
We also reviewed the brain scans. The oxygen saturation levels during the arrest were critically low, 52%. Long-term anoxia like that, we expect massive brain damage, motor loss, memory loss, at best, limited awareness. But Victor, he was quoting lab values 24 hours later, asking for arterial blood gases.
I showed one of the attending professors. He thought it was fake. He said, "This reads like fiction." I said, "Sir, I was there. He was cold, gray, gone." His reply, "Then you just witnessed something we can't teach."
They let me sit in the debrief. I listened in silence as they dissected my death. It was surreal, hearing your heartbeat graphed on a screen, hearing your name followed by flatline and non-viable. But what struck me wasn't the science. It was their faces, the disbelief, the reverence. Not for me, but for what had happened.
I've lectured on cardiac arrest for years. I've written journal articles. But now, I include Victor's case in every talk. Not as a conclusion, but as a question. I tell the audience, here is the data, here is the impossibility. Now, you tell me what brought him back.
We submitted the case for peer review, international journals. We removed any spiritual language, just raw numbers. And still, the reviewers were baffled. The phrases kept repeating, unprecedented recovery, neurological integrity unexplained. Recommendation? Further study.
You can measure a heartbeat. You can record an ECG. But you cannot quantify mercy. And in Victor Ignacio's case, mercy overwhelmed medicine.
When I read the final report, I smiled. Under outcome, it said, full recovery without intervention beyond standard resuscitation protocol. They couldn't write miracle, but they didn't have to. The silence in those words spoke louder than any declaration.
One of the nurses gave me a copy of his chart. Framed, she said. "This belongs in your living room." I placed it next to our wedding photo. One captured the beginning of our love, the other the proof that love doesn't end at death.
I'm not the same doctor anymore. I still treat fevers and fractures, but I also carry this invisible folder labeled Victor. It reminds me that science has borders, but faith does not.
When proof meets the impossible, something breaks. Not the system, not the data, but the pride that says, we've seen it all. Because in this case, they hadn't. Word spreads fast when the dead don't stay dead, but it spreads faster when the witnesses wear white coats. What happened in that clinic room didn't stay in Kambalda. It echoed into hospital corridors, classrooms, churches, and quiet living rooms where people knelt with questions.
The first person to visit us at home wasn't a doctor. It was a janitor from the hospital. He brought flowers. He said, "I mopped outside your ICU room every night, and I prayed." I asked, "Are you religious?" He said, "Not before that week."
I started receiving letters from nurses I'd never met, from students, from strangers. If God brought you back, maybe He hasn't given up on me. I stopped believing, but your story pulled me to my knees. It was humbling and terrifying because I wasn't just a survivor anymore. I had become a witness.
I hosted a teaching round with 30 final year med students. At the end, one raised his hand. He said, "Sir, what do we do with this?" I said, "Document it, respect it, and don't ever pretend we understand everything." Another asked, "Do you believe in God now?" I smiled and said, "I believe in humility."
People kept asking me if I felt something in that room. They wanted some spiritual drama. I told them, yes, I felt something. I felt the moment science stepped aside. That's what it was. Like a curtain pulled back, just for a second. Enough to say, you're not in control.
When I heard Victor had flatlined, I gathered our prayer group. 20 people. We prayed through the night. Not loud, not desperate, just faith, raw and steady. Then came the message. Heartbeat returned. I wept. We all did. We'd seen answers before, but not like this.
I brought Victor to church a few weeks later. People stared, whispered, some cried, some clapped. One woman touched his hand and said, "You walked through the valley of the shadow." He nodded and said, "But I wasn't alone."
Not everyone believed. Some colleagues laughed. One said, "I bet you weren't really dead." I didn't argue. I just handed him the defibrillator report. He read it, quiet, then said, "Well, maybe you were lucky." I looked him in the eye and replied, "No, I was loved."
We were invited to present the case at a regional medical summit. Standing there, I said, "We're not here to defend a miracle. We're here to describe it." And the room was silent, not because they doubted, but because they knew this was different.
Something changes when prayer answers science, not replaces it, not competes with it, but meets it right at the edge of certainty and goes further.
I started getting messages from mothers. "My son is in a coma. Please pray." From widows. "If your husband returned, maybe mine will too." I didn't know how to respond. I wasn't a pastor. I wasn't a preacher. I was just a wife who refused to stop hoping.
One night, I was alone in our bedroom. I opened my journal. I wrote 3 words. "Why me, God?" And I felt that same warmth again. That presence from the other side. No voice, no vision, just a knowing. Because you'll speak when others are silent.
Victor started speaking at youth nights, church gatherings, not preaching, just telling it as it happened. People cried, others doubted, but no one left untouched. You can reject theology, but you can't erase an ECG.
I wasn't religious before. I'm still not sure what I am. But I light a candle now, every morning, for no reason. Maybe for gratitude, maybe for God. Maybe because something inside me saw the veil lift, and now I can't unsee it.
In that hospital room, prayer didn't shout. It whispered. And science, for once, listened. What rose from the flat line wasn't just a heartbeat. It was testimony. And the world was listening.
They discharged me on the 13th day. The nurse smiled and said, "Miracle Man is going home." I laughed, but inside, I knew it wasn't over. A second chance is not a trophy. It's a torch, and torches are meant to burn.
The first time he stepped back into our house, it felt like watching a memory walk through the door. Same face, same posture, but different eyes. Softer, like he had seen something we hadn't, and never would, unless he told us.
He made pancakes the next morning, burnt in half of them. I didn't care. I kept watching him just to make sure he was really there. And when he smiled at me, I said, "Dad, do you feel normal?" And he said, "No, son. I feel new."
I went back to work a few weeks later. The hospital had prepared a small welcome, balloons, cake, but the real welcome was in their eyes. Doctors who once mocked prayer now stood quietly near my desk, waiting for a chance to ask, what did it feel like? I never gave them a medical answer. I just said, it felt like being seen, completely, and still loved.
Seeing him walk through the corridor again, I'll be honest, it shook me. Not because he survived, but because he shouldn't have. And now, every time I declare someone dead, I pause. Just a little longer. Because once, the rules broke.
He told me, if you want to be a great doctor, learn the data, but never forget the mystery. That line changed how I look at patients. They're not just charts, they're stories, waiting for redemption.
Sometimes I still wake up at night and touch his chest, just to feel the heartbeat. It's steady, strong. But what it reminds me most is not the fear of losing him. It's the gift of having him. Again.
I don't tell this story to be famous. I tell it because someone out there is losing hope. Someone's praying in silence, wondering if God still listens. I'm here to say, yes, He does. Even when you don't have faith. Even when you only have tears.
Most stories end with a heartbeat. This one began with it. The man who died for 85 minutes now lives with one mission: to remind the world that science can measure death, but only heaven gives life.
Every breath I take now, I feel like I'm borrowing it, and I try to use it for something that echoes. I speak at schools, at churches, at medical conferences, but not to impress, to ask one simple question. What would you do if God gave you back your life?
I used to think superheroes wore capes, but now I know. Sometimes they wear hospital gowns. And they pray when no one's watching. And they hold your hand when you're crying.
People say, wow, what a happy ending. But this isn't the end. It's the beginning. The beginning of a family learning how to love deeper, to forgive quicker, to slow down, and count every heartbeat.
I don't know how much time I have left, but I know this. The next time I see that light, that presence, I won't be afraid, because I've been there. And I was told, it's not your time, but when it is, I'll be ready.
So now, the question turns to you. What if you were given a second chance? What if the flat line wasn't the finish line? Would you live differently? Would you love more? Forgive deeper? Pray louder? You've heard the story. You've seen the impossible. Now ask yourself, what would you do with one more heartbeat? And if you're still listening, if something in your heart is stirring right now, then this is not the end. There are more stories like this, more lives touched by something greater than science, something eternal. So stay with us. Subscribe to this channel, share this story, and leave a comment below. Tell us what you would do if God gave you one more chance. This is not just a channel. This is a call to awaken.